Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final keynote of Wakelet Community Week 2025. It has been such a journey so far. The Wakelet team and I, honestly, we get emotional in these final moments of the week. I mean, everything was planned. Everybody showed up. All of the incredible figures in the community shared their knowledge, shared their expertise. We had some phenomenal keynotes happen, some amazing sessions. The 12-hour live stream was just amazing. And I always like to take the final keynote as a moment to reflect, as a moment to think about the journey that we've been on so far, and to really value what is happening right now, living in the moment, which is being part of an international community that are connected, that believe in each other. There's so much love, so much positivity and energy that we've felt over the last 4 or 5 days. So we thank you so much. Now, as I've said every time I've done one of these keynotes is I love all of the things to do with education that are around things like lesson plannings and curriculums and new technology and best practices. But I have a real soft spot for anything that goes beyond that and talks about the human parts of learning and how things can be more meaningful for students, things like mental health and mindfulness and that kind of thing. And I think that we're going to bring those two things together in this session. I'm really, really happy to bring to the stage Andi McNair, who has worked with Wakelet many times before. He's a friend of the platform, who's an incredibly accomplished speaker and author. And I would love to hear a little bit more about the session that's going to happen. So welcome to the stage, Andi.
Yay, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a huge fan of Wakelet, and I'm so excited about the work you guys have done this week. Such a great opportunity to bring the community together and just so much learning, so much growing, which is super exciting. So thank you so much for the introduction.
No. Thank you so much for joining us. And where are you joining us from today, Andi?
I am in Texas, right in the middle of Texas, Waco, Texas. So
lovely. We forget sometimes, anybody who's out of the United States forgets just how big Texas is.
Yes.
Huge, yeah. I mean, I think you can fit like 6 or 7 of the UKs in it or something like that. And it's a
Wow.
state. Yeah.
It's funny. I always tell people, I'm traveling somewhere in Texas next week and I'll be flying, not driving, which is so weird to some people. They're like, it's crazy that you fly within the state, but that's how big it is.
Yeah. People travel from place to place in Texas and it takes hours and hours and hours. And, that's like a road trip. In the UK here, a road trip is anything over like 2 hours, Everyone packs snacks and puts a playlist on. You're just going to the beach or something and it's 2 hours away. Yeah, America does things different. Well, Andi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to hear just a little bit about your session, perhaps, and everybody in the chat as well. Keep letting us know where you are joining us from because it makes all of the difference. We love seeing all the different countries that you're from. And also, and I'm sure Andi agrees with me on this one, keynotes like this, the value of them not only comes from the amazing things which we're going to learn, but it comes from your contributions as well. I'll be putting your contributions and your thoughts on screen as we go along. So please, if there is something that hits a spot, if there's a little bit of knowledge that you get, they're just like, hey, I really like that. That makes sense. If there's something you want to draw on from your own life, please share that as well. But Andi, tell us a little bit about yourself and what the session is.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about making meaning in the mess. My company, the LLC that I have, is called A Meaningful Mess. And really, it's just based on my own story and just the story of my life. Like, it's just who I am. I think a lot of people would just say, you're kind of just a mess. I'm not sure it's always meaningful, but I have learned to really embrace that mess and to not apologize for it all the time or not to say, oh gosh, I'm sorry, this isn't exactly the way that you thought it should be. And I think that's something we need to kind of wrap our minds around in education, this idea that our classrooms can be a messy place. It can be sometimes difficult to do it exactly the way that we are expected to, or exactly the way we feel like it should look on Instagram, or how it should look like somebody else's classroom. And what I found as an educator is that when I was able to embrace that mess and I was able to make it meaningful for my learners, man, everything changed. And I'm going to tell a little bit of that story in my presentation. So I'm just excited to talk about how valuable that mess can be when we look for opportunities to make it meaningful.
Oh, I can't wait to see this. I've got an element of chaos to my personality as well, and I love embracing the mess. So I'm really, really excited to see what you've got. I'll pull your presentation up, Andi, and feel free to get started. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, hey, you guys, I'm so excited to be here. And this is something like we just talked about. This is really near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've kind of lived with for a long time. I have a lot of chaos going on up here, I think really fast, and I don't always have my thoughts in order. And I think we have a lot of learners like that, right? That it's not always a weakness. Sometimes we can actually use that as a strength. And so as we go through, I'm going to talk about some practical strategies that you can use in your classroom to help your learners embrace some of those things. But I'm also going to talk about just some big ideas that it's really important that we remember in education right now. And so as we go through, yeah, like we talked about, I would love for you guys to share and to comment as we go through this slide. Hopefully you were looking. As those lights went out, I want to share with you guys just something really personal, that is a really great picture of my teaching career. So I had taught for 16 years in the classroom. I taught total 16 years. I had taught for several years before one day I was standing up in front of my classroom and I looked out at my learners and they either had their heads down on their desk, they were talking to their neighbor, or they had like that compliant glazed over look in their eyes. You guys know the one where it's like, I'm here because I have to be, but I'm not buying what you're selling. You can tell me in the chat if you've ever experienced that with your learners. But as I looked out at my classroom, it was as if somebody took the blinders off and I could see my classroom for what it actually was. And I couldn't find one engaged learner. They were all just kind of there because they had to be. And then I started self-reflecting and I realized that, oh my gosh, it's not just that they don't want to be here. I don't really want to be here. And so in that moment, it was a big wake up call to me. I honestly wanted to leave the classroom. I wanted to get out of education because I couldn't find a way to engage this generation of learners. I didn't know how to reach them. And I felt really, I don't know, I think the word I would use would be defeated. I felt pretty defeated as a teacher. And, I remember going home that night and talking to my husband and being like, I think I don't want to be a teacher anymore. This is really difficult. And I think I want to do something else. And I remember him saying to me, like, it's October, or we can have a conversation about this. And I just wanted out. And I'll tell you this, for me, how I found my way out of that darkness was I had to take some big risks. And we're going to talk about some of those big risks as we go through this presentation. But I think right now, regardless of where you are in the world, our learners need us to take risks. They need us to embrace the mess. And we're going to talk about not only why that is, but also some practical ways that you can make that happen. So really, an analogy I'll share with you guys is my husband and I have been married since we were in junior high, right? A long time. And so I'm also older. So some of you, if you're younger, you may not understand this as well. But a long time ago, we listened to these things called cassette tapes, right? And so we were moving from one small town to another small town. And we had two boys and they went to lift up a box in our garage. And when they did, all of my cassette tapes fell out onto the ground. And my two boys looked at me and they were like, what are these? And I was like, what are those? Like, that is, that's my life in a box. And then I realized they were my Bon Jovi tapes. And I was like, okay, everybody will just pause. We'll have a moment of reverence and then we'll pick these up with gloves on. And so we start picking up the tapes and one of my boys found, I don't know if you guys remember, we used to have like these Memorex tapes and they had shapes on them, colorful shapes. And those are what we would record mixtapes on. And I had made a mixtape for their dad. And they were like, what is this? And I was like, what is that? Like, that's a mixtape that I made for your dad. Like, it's got songs on it. And they wanted to know, like, what does that mean? And so I started explaining to them that we would wait for the top 9 at 9, right, to come on the radio. And when they would play the song that we wanted to record, we would push record and play at the same time. And then we would pause and wait for the next song to come on. And I'm all in my feelings, right? I'm remembering those times of like making mixtapes and all the things. And I open my eyes and my two boys are just standing there like, what are you talking about right now? Like, this is so weird. And they were so disconnected from that. They were like, we have so many questions. Like, one, why did you wait until 9 o'clock? And I was like, oh, I had to wait until 9 o'clock because that's when I knew the DJ was going to play the song. And they were like, what's a DJ? And I was like, who are you? Like, what is going on here? It was just so foreign for them. And then they wanted to know, our middle son, Eli, he wanted to know, like, why did you have to push record and play? Why didn't you just push record? I was like, that's a good question. We didn't ask questions when it came to how our jam boxes work. That's just what we did. And so as I tell that story, I just want you to understand that as a generation, they are living in a completely different reality than so many of us did. And what makes me sad about that is I think about some of the classrooms. Well, honestly, I think about my own classroom before everything shifted for me. I think about my own classroom and I think about some of the learning that these guys are experiencing. And it kind of looks the same as my classroom did when I was in school. And that was a long time ago. And the story I just told you, the fact that they can't even wrap their mind, they were just mind blown that I had to wait for a song to come on the radio. Like they were like, what if you wanted to hear that song at 2:00? I was like, well, if I wanted to hear it at 2:00, if they played it, that was great. But if they didn't, it was just completely different. And so I always say, if we keep teaching, if we're teaching the way we did even 5 years ago, it's like handing our learners a cassette tape and expecting them to find a way to play it. They don't know what to do with it. And so we have to kind of embrace this messiness, this in between of like, gosh, this is what things did look like. This is what they need to look like now, and making that movement and doing it in a meaningful way. One of the people I followed on Twitter, X, a long time ago, Alice Keeler, and she still does such great work in the technology space. And I heard her one time, I think she tweeted this out, or maybe I heard her speak, but she asked this question, when you're designing experiences and you're creating things for your learners, to kind of think through this idea of what I want to be a learner in my classroom today. And I think that's such a great question for us to ask. It really kind of hit home for me as an educator, that idea of like, would I want to be a learner in my classroom today? And I think you could even get more specific and think, gosh, would I want to be a struggling learner in my classroom today? Would I want to be a gifted learner in my classroom today? Like, am I giving my learners what they need so that my classroom is not just a place that they come because they have to, it's a place that they come because they want to. Because look, you guys, I believe that learning is natural. I believe that learning is something that our kids want and that they crave. I just think oftentimes school is maybe not as messy as it should be, so it doesn't always make sense to them. And that's what we're going to talk about throughout our time together. You guys are going to figure out real quick. I love analogies. I love to share analogies. It's how I operate. And one of the things that I've been thinking about often really lately is this idea of a GPS mindset. I think so often in education, if we're not careful, we get a map mindset. And here's what I mean by that. I was going to a meeting not too long ago, and I had my GPS. I struggle with ADHD. Actually, I don't struggle with ADHD. My family and friends struggle with my ADHD, but those things that I have going on up here, all that chaos, all of those things that are happening, I have to have, my GPS going a lot of the time, or I'll just drive into somewhere I shouldn't be, or somewhere I'm not going because I daydream or whatever. And so I had my GPS on. And as I was driving, I made a wrong turn, and rerouting popped up on my screen. And I instantly started thinking, like, gosh, as an educator in the classroom, how willing was I to reroute when something didn't make sense for my learners? I think if we're not careful, we fall into that map mindset. And if you remember, some of us remember we had these paper maps, right? And if you were the navigator, you would unfold that map, and you had to read. And once you committed to a way you were doing it, like that's how you were going. There was no like, oh, here's a better route. Oh, this will be faster. Like, it is just what you do. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, that I think that for a long time, before this shift in my mindset, I was teaching with a map mindset. It was, this is where we are, this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to get there. And we would do the things, and we would go exactly that way. And I'm saying, once I kind of shifted things and I started to see things from a different perspective, I realized that, I got to have a GPS mindset. Because here's the reality. A GPS mindset encourages educators. It encourages us all to recognize that every learner will never, we're not teaching teaching robots. They will never have the same ETA for a deep understanding of the content. They will never get to the same place at the same time in the same way. And to think that's going to happen, regardless of what curriculum you're using or what you're being told, that is not how we operate as humans, right? Our brains are different. We operate different. We learn differently. And so I think sometimes we tend to kind of beat ourselves up when our kids don't get to that same place at the same time in the same way. But the reality is they were never created to do so. Like, that's just not how they operate. And so I think as we think through that, it's really important that we acknowledge this idea of a GPS mindset. So I'm going to remember that my kids are not supposed to get to the same place in the same time in the same way, that we're going to have to adjust some of those things. I think about my GPS, and when it comes on and it says, hey, there's a barrier up ahead, you might want to take a different route, or there's a faster route that you could take. And I think sometimes some of our learners are ready for that faster route, and we tend to hesitate to give it to them because we want everybody to kind of stay in the same place. And I don't think that's always the best idea. So one more analogy I'll share before we kind of get to the practical and the meat of this presentation. I live out in the country in Texas, and so I drive by a lot of windmills and I see them all the time. And I've recently been thinking a lot about the way a windmill works. And while I don't know a ton about them, I don't own a windmill, and I don't know as much as I should about them to do this analogy. But here's what I do know. If a windmill, if I got a windmill and I was going to use it, I would have to strategically place it where it could access what? You guys can share in the chat. What would you have to access to, where would you want to position a windmill? It would need to access what? The wind, right? It would need to access the wind. And I think you would never buy a windmill, put it in a building, and expect it to do what it's supposed to do. And yet I think that that's sometimes what we do for our learners. They have this thing called potential, right? They have these things that they need to be able to access. And yet sometimes they're not given the opportunity. And so I want to talk about kind of 3 things that I think our learners need to be able to access to reach their potential. I also am a big word person. I think words are really important. And so I want to make sure we all are on the same page as far as what potential means. It's that having or showing the capacity to become or develop something in the future. And every one of our learners walk into the classroom with potential. Every one of them. There's not a kid that walks through that door that doesn't have the potential to grow into, move into these different spaces of who they're going to become. But the reality is, just like you wouldn't put a windmill in a building and expect it to access wind, we can't put our learners into situations where they can't access what they need to become those things. Yes. And so I think these are the things that we want to make sure, just like a windmill needs to access wind, our learners need to access these things. They need to access opportunity. They don't always accept those opportunities. They don't always step into them, and that's okay, but it has to be put in front of them. They need to be able to access support, and the support for who they are as a learner. And finally, resources. It's why I love tools like Wakelet. They give us those resources. They give us the opportunities to make some of these connections and give our learners the opportunity to make some of these connections as we support them through the platform. And so when we think about technology resources, curriculum resources, whatever it is that we have access to, using those in a meaningful way and remembering that GPS mindset, I think is really important. So as we go through, here's how I've kind of structured our time together. I always explain it this way. When I had that shift in thinking, when I went from kind of being in the dark as a teacher and really wanting to leave the profession to shifting into that space where I knew I wanted more for my learners. If I had to tell it to you in one sentence, I would say this. I had to shift from being a traditional teacher that did what was easy to becoming an innovative educator that did what was best. I had to start taking risk. I had to start doing something different because what I was doing wasn't giving me a return on my investment. And I had people telling me what I should do. I had people saying, oh, you should teach this way. You should do this. You should do this. And some of it was great. But the reality is not all of those people were in my classroom experiencing what I was experiencing. And so I had to embrace, like, I know some things as an educator. I have the ability to do this, and I may do it a little bit differently than everybody else. It might be a little bit messier, but the reality is, I know these kids and I know what's going to work for them. And I'll share kind of the risk that I took as we go through some of this content together. But I think if we had to ask ourselves, how do we know if a mess is meaningful? I think the answer would be, is real learning happening? And real learning, if we wanted to use an acronym, I think is number one, and maybe most important, relevant. Can our learners connect to can they connect what is being learned beyond the walls of the classroom? I want to say real quick here. I don't know if you guys have heard the phrase real world, like these are real world skills, or these are real things you're going to use. I am not a super fan of that phrase. And here's why. The reason I'm not a fan of the phrase real world is because I think it like darkens the line between what they experience at school and what they consider real. And school is real, right? What they do at school is their real world. And I always think to myself, like if I was in the classroom and my teacher said to me, like, this is how you would use this in the real world, I'd be like, where am I right now? Right? Like I thought I was in the real world. And so I think we want to like try to move away from that phrase real world and start to say things like, hey, this is what this looks like in the classroom. This is what this looks like beyond the walls of the classroom, because we want them to know school is very real. And honestly, if we think about this meaningful mess, we want our classroom to be very closely connected to what they experience outside of the classroom, because if that's not the case, it's not relevant. Engaging, we're going to talk about some ways to engage your learners, and I think your learners should be engaged in the first 8 seconds. We'll talk about what that means. Active, are our learners actively involved in the experience? I often think about learning as surfing, right? You very rarely see a surfer on their board with their knees locked, arms by their side, eyes straight ahead. Like that's not what surfing looks like. When you see a surfer, they are typically like knees bent, arms out, their head is on a swivel because they're having to work hard to stay on the board, right? It's not the surfing instructor that is active when you're taking surfing lessons. It's the surfer. And I think we have to wrap our mind around that in education right now. Like it's shouldn't be passive. Surfing isn't done to you. Surfing is something you have to be actively doing. And I think the same is true for learning. Learning shouldn't be done to them. Learning is something they should have to be actively engaged in order to access or to be a part of that opportunity. And then finally, lasting, will they talk about what was learned after the school day is over? Are they thinking about your class when they're not in your class? Because that's where the sweet spot of teaching is. When they're thinking about what they learned in your class, when they're not in your class, oh, it's good stuff. It's going to stick with them and it's going to stay there a lot longer than if when that bell rings, they walk out and it's as if it never happened. Yes? Okay, everybody good? Hopefully we're trucking along here. I want to make sure everybody is good and getting what they need. So here's what we're going to do. I thought we would kind of go through these pieces: relevant, engaging, active, and lasting. And as we do that, I'm going to share some big ideas and some things we need to keep in mind about today's learners, as well as some practical strategies that you can use. So I know that when I come to professional learning, I always like practical ideas. So I'm going to share those, as well as 1 or 2 strategies in each category that you can use. And then we're going to kind of wrap up with some big ideas. But I want to say this before I jump into this. Me shifting to this kind of messy mindset and being able to embrace my classroom as a meaningful mess did not happen overnight. I remember knowing that I wanted things to change, but I wasn't sure exactly what that would look like. So I never want to send the message that this was a fast shift, but it was something that I kind of just took baby steps, and I put one foot in front of the other. And I knew that if I wanted to be all that I could be as a teacher, it had to be a place, my classroom had to be a place that I wanted to be. And in order for that to happen, these pieces had to be there. So I knew it had to be relevant for my learners. And one way I always made that happen was just kind of knowing who they were. And I listened for the things that they talked about. I would listen to, like, what are they talking about the most, or what are they interested in? And gosh, these guys obviously use emojis a lot. It's almost like a secret language. We have 3 kiddos, 2 boys one who's graduated from college, one who will be a senior in college, and then our daughter just graduated this year and will be starting college. We just moved her into her dorm. And so sometimes they send me messages with emojis, and I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what does that even mean? It's almost like a second language for them. But I think we can use that to our advantage, right? So I want to talk a little bit about emojis and how they can be used in your classroom to make things relevant. We're going to get through this fairly quickly, but did you guys know that, I don't know if I put that slide in there. Oh yes, let me let you read this slide first. I'm going to leave this up here, give you guys a second to read it. Okay, I know you may be a minute or a minute and a half behind, so I'll give you a second. I love this because this is brain science behind why we need to give our learners the opportunity to make predictions. Now, this is messy because their predictions are not always going to be correct. And if you're kind of a map mindset person, you like to, tick along and get to those places fairly quickly. But in a GPS mindset, oftentimes they're going to make a prediction. It may not be correct, and that's okay. But here's what's awesome about this. This idea of making predictions gives our learners the opportunity to lock into what it is that they're learning. And what I love most about this statement is that it says students may not be interested in the subject matter itself, but their brains need to find out if their predictions are correct. So this isn't about saying, and I think that's the mistake we sometimes make with our learners, is we feel like we'll just, they'll just comply or they'll just do what we told them to do. And these guys it's just not how they operate. So the more we can get them to invest by speaking their language, the better chance we're going to have that they're going to engage. So I love the idea of just using emojis to like have your learners make a prediction about what they're going to be learning. So if we were going to do something like the Super Bowl right here in the United States, we have the Super Bowl. It's a big deal. I don't like football, but I'm going to talk about it some in this presentation because I like analogies and a lot of those connect to this. So Super Bowl, this would be connected to your content. I'm just using this as an example. If you put these 3 emojis up and ask them, what prediction can you make about what we're going to be learning today? What a great way to get them engaged, right? You're using emojis, you're speaking their language, and you're giving them the opportunity to make a prediction, which locks them in. So I love the idea of an emoji debate. And gosh, I think there are so many ways you could use Wakelet to make this happen and give your learners the opportunity to share their thoughts and for you to share the resources for this. But here's how it works. So our learners, when they're debating ideas or they're sharing maybe there's a little controversy, they're talking about 2 things that they're digging into and they're comparing, contrasting those. Here's how I think this works. If we were talking about the Super Bowl or any sport, you could say, what is best? Is it the sport itself? Is it the food that you eat while you're watching the sport? Or is it the commercials on TV? Like, what's the best thing? If you were doing this with content, you might do this with different characters in a book. You might do this with different historical locations or historical events. There's lots of different ways you could use this with your content. But if you were going to do it this way, you would then have team 1 identify 5 emojis. You could do 5 or 3 if you needed to scaffold this. 3 to 5 emojis that they would use to justify their response. Now, they can't use words. They're only using emojis. So they have to say, okay, we choose the game. We think the game is the most important part of the Super Bowl. And so we would say football, and then they have to justify each emoji. So we chose the football because, we chose the flame because, we chose the explosion because, and as they justify, they're having to think really deeply about this content, right? And as they make these connections, as they're justifying, there's just this thing happening in their brain, and it's messy. This is not something that's going to be easy. They're going to say like, what do you mean we have to use an emoji? Like, I don't know what emoji I would use. Well, that's okay. We're going to give you the opportunity to think about it. So they're going to create their emojis, justify each one, and then they're going to write a big idea statement. So here is our debate statement based on our emojis. Does that make sense to everybody? Hopefully that makes sense. So they would choose their 5 emojis, justify each one, share a big idea. Then team two didn't choose the game. They chose the commercials. And so they chose the TV, the popcorn, the laughing face, the money, and the art palette. And so they would go through and they would justify each emoji. Here's why we chose each one of these. And then they would create a big idea. They would create, hey, here's why we chose this. Here's our kind of debate statement. And then finally, they take those after they've listened to each group share, they are going to share an emoji rebuttal. So next they're going to do 5 more emojis and 1 more big statement, 5 more emojis, 1 more big statement. And then there's going to be a winner, right? Who won the debate based on their 5 emojis. So total, they are coming up with 10 emojis to justify their thinking around the content that you're teaching. That makes it relevant. I'm taking something that they talk about often, they care about. I'm giving them the opportunity to justify why they are choosing those things. And man, is it messy? Absolutely. Is it meaningful? 100%. And so as we do something like that, that can give us such a big return on our investment. And in my resources, I'm going to add those soon. I haven't done it yet, but I promise I will. When I add those, there's going to be a resource for you to use in your classroom with the emoji debate, just a little kind of sheet where your students can document their thinking and think through this kind of learning experience. But this is an example of relevance, but I would just say for our learners to want to be at school, for them to invest, it has to be relevant for them. There has to be a reason for them to invest, and it's so important. And yes, I 100% agree. Gamification can be huge in a classroom. Okay, so let's get to the second piece, and that is engaging. Look, you guys, I'm not going to lie. This is one of the most important things that we can do in the classroom as a teacher. I think that for our own well-being and for the well-being of our learners, we have to make sure that when they come into the classroom, we understand that if we walk into the classroom and we just start teaching, like they're in class, we come in and we're just like, okay, today, here's what we're doing. It's like getting in your car and sitting in it and being like, okay, I hope it starts. Nobody would do that, right? You get in the car and you start the engine, or for some, I guess, start the engine, right? When you get in, we have to turn the ignition on. And I have seen lots of classrooms where the ignition isn't turned on, right? Engagement doesn't happen right away. And let me say this, let me go back real quick to the emoji idea. If you don't use emojis or that is not said, then you could always do this with images, with just pictures of icons, any pictures of icons, random things that they can put in order to create a debate statement. That's what you're looking for here. Okay, let me go back to this. So engaging, really important. And I was reading a book recently. I didn't finish it because ADHD, but Dale Carnegie wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People a long time ago. And I was listening to some specific pieces of that. And one of the things he said in that book was that you have to bait the hook to suit the fish. So when you go fishing, it is important that you bait the hook for what you're trying to catch. And I think often as educators, we don't bait the hook to suit the fish. Instead, we often bait the hook to suit ourselves. So we say things like, you guys are going to have to know this in 4th grade. You're going to have to know this when you're an adult. They don't care, right? They have to know, how am I going to use it right now? And we have to be able to really help them make connections. So one of the things that I think is important is that we engage our learners in the first 8 seconds. Now, that might seem a little bit intimidating, might seem a little bit like, why do we have to do that? Well, because as soon as they walk into the classroom, that's a real messy moment, right? It's a transition period. If they've been switching classes, there's a lot going on. They're coming from one class to another. Their brain is having to pivot to learn something new. I'm a big fan of cross disciplines, of making connections between content, because I think it's so weird that we have kids go from like math to English to science. Like those things should all come together. And some of you may do that. We don't always do it that way here in the United States. But it makes more sense to me for us to embrace this idea that our kids' brain shouldn't have to always adjust, that content should be woven together. But as they come in the first 8 seconds, there needs to be something that turns that ignition on, right? That gets them ready to learn, that gives them an opportunity to want to engage. If we go back to our surfing analogy, right? I think about, like, if I'm a surfer and I walk up to the shoreline, if there aren't any waves in the water, I'm probably going to pack my board up and go home. And the reality is, I think that's what a lot of our learners do. They might not literally leave, but they disengage. They put their head down on their desk. They don't want to be there. They're not invested. And so what we want to do is we want to create these waves so that when they look out at the water, they're like, oh man, I can't wait to get out there, right? That they literally grab their board and they run into that water excited about the opportunity and excited about what they're about to experience. So one way you can do that is to literally just put a picture up on the screen in your classroom, like any picture. You could also put this into a Wakelet board and let them go find it there. There's so many different ways you could make this happen in your classroom. And you could probably think of so many different ways you could make this happen. But let's just show your learners a picture and you say to them, based on this picture, what is a prediction you can make about what we're going to learn today? Now, here's what they're going to say. I don't know, because we're in math class and that's a picture of a grasshopper. So I am not sure what's going on here. You have to let them sit in their struggle with that. They're going to struggle a little bit with that idea. And, I think that's the thing. We're going to talk about productive struggle a lot here in a second. But I think that's the thing with productive struggle is we're not always willing to let them sit in it. We put a picture up like this, and as soon as they start to get a little bit uncomfortable or they're not sure what to do with it, we want to jump in and be like, okay, let me give you an example. Or, okay, let me help you here. No, that's not what's happening here. Because what's going to happen is eventually, if you let them sit in it long enough, somebody's going to say something. They'll make a connection and the rest of the class will be like, oh, that's how this works. And once they figure it out, it's just like, it's like a train you can't stop. And this gives them an opportunity. Some of your kids are going to make very surface level analogies. Some of your kids are surface level connections. Some of your kids are going to make very deep connections. And I love this because everybody gets to play, right? Whether you make a surface level connection or a deep connection, I don't have to do something different for everybody. I'm just doing something that everybody gets to play and let them grapple. Oh, now you're going to love a slide I have in a little bit because I love that word grapple so much. When we talk about productive struggle, we're going to talk through that. But this is something they may struggle in, but turns on the ignition. For sure. So definitely something you want to think about. I also love the idea of encouraging kids. This is another way that I think you can give them an opportunity to struggle a little bit, letting them make unexpected connections. So maybe what is the connection between a sandwich and a book? Well, when you say that, I'm like, a sandwich and a book, what do those even have in common? But then all of a sudden I start thinking about it, and there are a lot of connections between a sandwich and a book. The good part is oftentimes in the middle, right? There's a front and a back. There's a top and a bottom. There are a lot of connections I can make. I did this with teachers recently, and oh my gosh, there were some deep, deep connections that I hadn't even thought of. And that's what's going to happen with your learners as well. If you wanted to take this even further, you could do, I had not heard of synectics, and you may not have either, but you can always Google it. Synectics are this idea of making these unexpected connections. But what about a 4-box synectic, where they don't just have to connect it to one thing, they have to connect it to 4 things. Maybe a sandwich is like a time capsule. How is it like a puzzle? How is it like a story? How is it like a building? Oh my gosh, that is so messy. But for somebody whose brain works like mine, and it's kind of ping-ponging all over the place anyway, I'm locking in right here because you're letting me use my brain in the way that makes sense for me. And for those kids, this can be really powerful. So here are some examples. I'll give you a second to look at these. You don't have to read them all. Maybe read one. Okay, so these are just some really good examples of that. And I wanted you guys to see what that looks like. Okay, this is really an important conversation and something that I learned quickly in my classroom. I think oftentimes as educators, we ask a lot of questions, or we should. We should be asking more questions than giving answers. And I think one of the things we tend to do so often is we ask guiding questions. When we think about this idea of GPS mindset, sometimes my GPS says, hey, there's a barrier up ahead and you need to go a different direction, or here's a faster route and here's how you're going to get there. That's when my GPS is guiding me. But you know what? Sometimes my GPS comes on and it says, it'll just say, hey, you're on the fastest route, or hey, you're going in the right direction. That's my GPS supporting me. And here's why I tell this story. There are a lot of kids in our classrooms who are going to be on the right track, right? They may always kind of be doing the right thing. They might oftentimes be getting the answers correct. But for a kid who's sitting in a classroom and doesn't struggle or doesn't experience maybe something as being difficult, those kids can often feel unseen. I would say that's how they feel. They don't feel seen. So I had a student tell me one time, like, gosh, my teacher is always going around and asking all of the struggling kids, asking all of the kids who don't understand questions, but they never come to my desk. And that was such an epiphany, because it's like, gosh, we don't really think about that. But I wonder what would happen if, when we're designing a learning experience, we don't just think about the guiding questions we're going to ask, but we also think about the supporting questions. So what if, like, my GPS says, hey, you're on the right track? What if, instead of just feeling like we have to guide them, what if we said things like, hey, can you explain your thinking to me? Or, man, that's really cool. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you did it that way? Just giving them that opportunity to feel supported. I think there are so many kids at school that just kind of fly under the radar. They aren't seen. And so because they aren't seen, they aren't supported. So when you're asking questions, make sure even the kids who don't need to be guided, even the ones who are fairly compliant and checking the boxes, we still want to support those learners. We want them to know that they are being supported. Okay, so we've talked about relevant, engaging. Now we're going to talk about learning that is active. And if you know my work at all, you know that you guys are not going to get out of this session without talking about passion-based learning. Gosh, if I'm going to talk about struggle, if I'm going to talk about kids being given the opportunity to learn in a way that makes most sense for them, it is 100% passion-based learning, something that is also called Genius Hour. If you have not heard of Genius Hour, we need to be friends. It is my favorite thing in the world. And when I told that story earlier about the lights going out for me as an educator and not being sure where my next move was, or that if I was even going to stay in education, I found Genius Hour. And I fell in love with this idea of my learners being given part of their school day to pursue their passion and purpose. And it changed everything. Not right away. We had to work through some messy learning. If I had to give you the poster child for messy learning, it would be Genius Hour. But look, one of my core beliefs, one of the things I believe most about what learners deserve, is that I believe every learner deserves an opportunity to kind of pursue their passion and purpose during the school day. I think that every kid has passion, and I think that every kid has a purpose. And why would we not let them lean into that? Why would we not give them the opportunity to explore that and learn more about who they are and what they're interested in? And Genius Hour gives us the opportunity to do that. Oh, I love that. The hot sauce in education or passion projects. What a great connection. It's so true. So true. So that being said, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the way I see Genius Hour and what that looks like. I think there are 5 different projects that kids can work on. I haven't come across a project yet that didn't fit into one of these categories. I do think projects need purpose. I think I've seen Genius Hour before where it was just indoor recess, and I think it has to be more meaningful than that. I will be honest, when I first started Genius Hour, it was just a mess, so messy. But then all of a sudden, I found this way to make it meaningful. And I think one way you can do that is to have these kind of purpose categories. So a mastery project would be the opportunity to master a skill or concept by doing. Learning a new language, right? Learning to make the perfect pizza, learning how to sew or how to crochet. That would be a mastery project. A kindness project, that's the opportunity to impact someone else in a positive way. So impact a specific population, maybe the homeless community, maybe the elderly community, like doing something that impacts them in a positive way. That would be a kindness project. An innovation project, that's the opportunity to create something new or make something better. So if they invent something or they take something that already exists and make it better, 100% an innovation project. Perspective, the opportunity to change their own perspective about something or the perspective of someone else. And then finally, an awareness project. That is a project that is the opportunity to make others aware of an important issue or problem. So look, I think Genius Hour passion projects have such a place in education. If we're going to get our kids to the place where they're going to be able to use the skills that they're learning beyond the walls of the classroom, they have to dig into who they are. They have to figure out who they are as individuals and connect the content they're learning to that. I think for me, productive struggle happened so naturally within Genius Hour. It was like sneaking broccoli in their mashed potatoes, right? Like they would be struggling, but they were willing to work through it because it was something they were interested in or passionate about. Look, for me, we had to really kind of create a process for this work in my classroom. And so I created the 6 P's of Genius Hour. It's what I shared in the Wakelet Community Week last year. And the 6 P's of Genius Hour are passion, plan, and pitch. They figure out what they're passionate about, what their purpose is. They plan their project out to practice those executive functioning skills that so many of them need. They pitch their idea to their peers. What an opportunity to build community and for them to lean into each other's strengths and learn from each other. That is the prep of a Genius Hour project: passion, plan, pitch. Finally, they work on a project to develop a product and ultimately give a presentation. So again, project is where the productive struggle often happens. Their product doesn't always come out exactly the way that they think it will. And their presentation is an opportunity for them to share their growth or share what they've learned. So if you want to know more about the 6 P's of Genius Hour, you can visit my website, andymcnair.com. I'll put that in the resources for you to check out. But definitely something that I won't shut up about because it changed everything for me. Finally, learning has to be lasting if it's going to be meaningful, right? We've gone through REA. This is the L. Learning has to be lasting. Look, here's a big mistake that I think we make in education. If you went to the store and you were shopping and somebody started putting random things in your basket, how would you respond? Chances are you may have a few choice words to say, and you would start putting the things that they were putting in your basket back on the shelf. You would just be like, okay, I'm going to not need that. I'm going to put that back on the shelf. And I think that for a lot of our learners, that's what school looks like for them. We put things in their basket and they put it right back on the shelf. And then when they go to take the test, we turn around and say, hey, where's all that stuff that I put in your basket all day? And they're like, oh, I put it back on the shelf. I don't even need it. Oh my gosh, that is so frustrating for us as educators, right? They're not willing to keep things in their basket. And so here's what I would say to you. If we change that analogy just a little bit, and if I said, hey, I'm going to put sugar in your basket because your husband loves sweet tea and you're almost out of sugar, or hey, I'm going to put pancake syrup in your basket because you're having pancakes on Saturday and you don't have any syrup, how would I respond to that? Probably, thank you. Can you meet me here next Tuesday? Like, I would be all about that. And the only difference is that you're telling me why you're putting it in my basket. There's purpose. If you're just putting it in my basket and I don't know why, I'm going to put it right back on the shelf. And so are our learners. If you're just throwing content in their basket, like, hey, you're going to need this, here's this, here's this, here's this, I promise you, when you go to check out, it's not going to be in their basket. It's not going to be there. They're going to put it back on the shelf every single time because it has to be, we have to explain the why. That is so important. And so how do we do that? How do we make that happen? Well, I love the idea of having our learners create streaks. And if you don't know what a streak is, in video games, on Apple Watches, even in Snapchat, A streak is something that you keep going, right? It's something that continually is going back and forth. And gosh, I love the idea of using that with our learners and saying to them, hey, every day, if you can make a connection to what you learned in class. So we learned about fractions in class today. If you can connect fractions beyond the walls of the classroom. So if tomorrow you come in and you go, oh my gosh, we ordered pizza last night and I saw that my family ate 3/4 of the pizza, that would be a connection that they're making. Every day that they can make a connection, they keep their streak alive. Yes. The first time they can't make a connection, I'm not mad at you, but your streak dies and you have to start over. I love this because it celebrates kind of who they are and something that they're interested in, but it also puts the learning in their lap. It's not about, I'm going to tell you the connection that you should make, or I'm going to spoon feed you. Look, that's one of the things people say most about this generation is they're spoon fed and they're coddled. Well, here's the thing. Those are two things that are done to you. If we don't want these guys to be spoon fed and coddled, there's a really easy fix for that. We just stop spoon feeding and stop coddling them, right? So I love this idea of I'm not going to tell you the connection you're going to make. You're going to make the connection. And if you can tell me that connection the next day, you'll keep your streak alive. Okay, I want to talk about one last thing because this is not part of the real thing, but I wanted to make sure that I fit this in. And this is that our learners need to be challenged. As I was kind of thinking about, gosh, how do I weave in this idea of productive struggle that is so important? I think everything we've talked about engages our learners in productive struggle in a very relevant, engaging, active, and a way that will result in that lasting learning. But let me just kind of bring it home, land the plane by talking specifically about what this looks like. I'm going to give you a second to read this definition of productive struggle. And I love this so much because this definition, by the way, my bestie ChatGPT wrote this definition, but I love it so much because it talks about what productive struggle is, the process of actively grappling. Somebody used that word earlier in the chat. How do we do that? With challenging tasks or problems. We've got to put challenging things in front of them. And then why do we do that? Because we want to deepen their understanding, not because we want to make their life difficult, not because we want them to be uncomfortable, but because we know when those things happen, it deepens their understanding. I oftentimes explain it as like going to the gym. And giving our learners the opportunity to build those muscles. I think a lot of times we say like, gosh, why are they so uncomfortable with struggle? The same reason that when I go to the gym, I can't lift a 150-pound weight because I haven't built those muscles to do that. And I think sometimes our learners and even us as educators, if we don't put ourselves in positions to experience that, then I think we're going to be, it's going to be difficult to move the needle forward and to get them to be willing to learn. And so productive struggle, we want to give them that opportunity to build that muscle over and over again so that it's there when productive struggle happens for them. Okay, let me see if I can get to the next slide. One way I think we can do this, I love this idea, is just showing your kids like 4 pictures or 4 videos and saying to them, again, this would be a great thing to do within Wakelet, giving them 4 pictures, 4 videos, and asking them not, hey, no, you wouldn't say that first picture means that you totally get it. The last picture, the one of her climbing means that today was really difficult for you. But what if we just put this in front of our kids and said, hey, which one of these pictures best represents your learning today and why? Which one of these pictures best represents your learning today and why? Now, I'm not spoon feeding them. I'm not saying, did you get it? Did you not? Let me help you. I'm letting them tell their learning story. So I love the idea of giving them 4. You could give them 2 images and just saying, hey, which one best represents your learning today and why? Finally, I want to make sure as we take it home here, we come back to this surfing analogy. I love this quote from Laird Hamilton. He says this: wiping out is an underappreciated skill. Look, I think for so many of our kids, they think that struggle is a negative thing. I think for us as teachers, we struggle with struggle, right? Us as humans, we struggle with struggle. But let me say this: if one of the world-class surfers, one of the best surfers in the world, if he can find value in wiping out, I think that we can find value in productive struggle, right? And so I love the idea of just putting this up in front of your kids and let them make the connections. Hey, what does learning and surfing have to do with each other? And they're going to be like, nothing. Let them sit in it. They'll get to it. And when they start making those connections, show them this quote and maybe show them a video of Laird Hamilton and how amazing he is. And then say, if he can find value in wiping out, I think we can find value in productive struggle. I love the idea of using the phrase yards gained. If you are a football fan, or maybe if football looks different for you here, in the United States, we have, obviously we talked about the Super Bowl earlier, but football, and I don't really like football. I don't understand it, but I do know this: when the players are playing, you don't just celebrate the touchdowns. The people in the stands, they get excited every time there is forward movement on the field. If those guys out on the field, if they go 1 or 2 yards forward, everybody's excited, right? Because here's the thing. If the audience only cheered when they made touchdowns, I'll tell you this, those players would not be as motivated as they are when the cheering is continual. Our learners need us to not just celebrate touchdowns. They don't need us to just get excited about the big things that they do. And when they cross the I don't even know the line, like when they get into the end zone, I guess I would say, they don't need us to just get excited about that. They need us to celebrate yards gained. And so I love the idea of just like celebrating that with them, walking up to them and saying like, hey, I see you and I see the gains I see the yards you're gaining. Maybe you just pat them on the back and you say yards gained, or whatever football looks like for you. Like however that forward movement is celebrated, whatever that phrase is, how can you celebrate them moving forward and not just making the touchdown, not just making the goal? How do we celebrate that in a big way so that our learners feel seen and they're willing to embrace that productive struggle in a meaningful way? Okay, last analogy that I'm going to share with you guys is this. And I thought we kind of know each other now, so this is an embarrassing story, but I'm going to tell it to you as I wrap up. A few Christmases ago, I was out shopping. I was in a store. I came out of the store and I got into a car that I thought was mine. I looked over into the passenger seat and there was somebody in the passenger seat that I did not know. And she was eating a Subway sandwich. And I remember feeling very, very uncomfortable. And I thought to myself like, oh, this is not where I belong, right? Like I am in the wrong place and I'm obviously not very scary. Like she didn't look scared. She just kind of smiled. And I said, this isn't my car, is it? And she was like, no, it is not. And I just did not know what to do. I'm sitting in the driver's seat, but here's how I felt. If I'm honest with you, I felt a little bit stupid. I felt a little bit lost. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt confused. I felt trapped in that car. Like, oh my gosh, let me just get out of here as fast as I can. It was really uncomfortable. And I tell you that because I recently looked up the phrase. I saw somebody share this on Twitter and I recently did it. I looked up school makes me feel, and these are some of the results that I got. I don't think this is how we want school to make our kids feel. I think we could all come up with words that we want to see here instead. Like school makes me feel inspired. School makes me feel excited. Learning makes me feel happy. It makes me get to know myself better. School makes me struggle maybe. School makes me feel strong. School makes me fill in the blank with whatever you want, but then you've got to decide, what do I have to do to make that happen? If I want school to feel that way, how do I make that happen for my learners? I was sitting recently with somebody on a plane and he said to me, I feel like education is at a place right now where it's like a keyhole that some people can see through. Like if you look real close, you can see what's on the other side of that locked door, but it feels like it's locked and nobody's sure what the key is. Nobody's sure how to open the door to get to the next best thing in education. And I'll tell you this, I think I know what the key is. I think I might know the secret. The key to messy learning is risk-taking. So the last question that I want to leave you guys with are, what risks are you going to take this year with your learners? What are you willing to do? How messy are you willing to be? Can you create those opportunities and give them those resources, and using amazing tools like Wakelet to make some of these happen so that our school and classroom culture are everything that it should be? I'm telling you through my own experience, if I would not have taken the risk and started giving my learners the opportunity to pursue their passion and purpose during the school day, I 100% would have left education. But I decided to take the risk, and it changed everything. So, man, I just want to say how thankful I am for tools like Wakelet, and how thankful I am for the community that they've created. That's even more important. And I just appreciate you guys so much giving me the opportunity to share. I would love to continue learning with you guys. My contact information is there. Anything that you want to learn more about, I just appreciate the work Wakelet is doing. And more than anything, this community is so big and so meaningful. And get messy this year, you guys. I promise you it'll be worth it. Thank you very much.
Oh, what an amazing message, Andi. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I've been following along in the chat and kind of amplifying everybody's thoughts, and you should definitely check it out after your session as well, because I think that the things that you were sharing resonated so much with people. I've had some takeaways from this. The last story that you told reminded me of when I'd first passed my driving test. So I was a completely new driver, and I did my first trip to the supermarket. And I parked the car, and I went into the shop, and I was just, probably looking for, just some groceries and things. And then I heard on the loudspeaker, could the owner of, and then they described my car, please go to security. And I was like, usually you hear it and you're like, oh gosh, I wonder what they've done. It was my car that he was describing. So I went over to the security guy. The guy was like, I was like, is there a problem? He was like, yeah. He was like, apparently your car is like, the door is open and the car is running, like it's got its key in. And I was like, no, come on. And I was like, I'm going to run down now. And as I was running down, I was checking my pockets, and I was like, I don't have my keys. I was like, maybe this actually happened. And I got to the car park, and sure enough, my car was there. The door was open and the car was running with the keys in. And I was like, my God, I was so embarrassed. I definitely learned a lot on that day. Very obvious, but it stuck with me, the lesson. The second thing I think was the way that I would describe the things that you're sharing is it's like breaking the fourth wall, right? It's like when you're watching a movie and the actor turns and looks at the camera, in this kind of understanding that both of us are in on this. I know that I'm acting in a movie, and I know that you're watching the movie. And I think that that's so disarming, and taking that and applying it to the classroom where students play a role in their learning. They understand that they're learning. They're not just on autopilot, attending the class and kind of I love that. And I thought the end sentiment, which is that learning from failing, there's no such thing as failing. There's just learning, right?
Struggle. Yes.
Right. Nobody ever learned anything from things going to plan and from everything going right. Like the most memorable lessons that I've ever had in my life have all come from failure. They've all come from dropping the ball or not preparing well enough or handling a situation. So I think being able to, share that with your students and for yourself as well changes the dynamic of learning so much. And yeah, it was so inspirational.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, thank you so much. I am such a fan of the work you guys do over at Wakelet, and I'm also such a fan of the work that educators do every single day. So I can't say enough about just the impact that both of those things, and then the synergy that happens when it's all together. It's just good stuff. So it's such good stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Andi. I'm sure that we'll be working with each other again, and I can't wait to see more of your presentations moving forward. Everybody, please follow Andi on socials. Take a look at the books. Really, really cool stuff going on there. Some amazing ideas, which I know you're all going to take and practically apply in your classes and in your lives. So thank you so much, Andi. Big round of applause.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Well, what a fantastic session to end the week. Honestly, guys, this is the point of the week where I get emotional, I get sad, but also very, very happy as well, because I get to reflect on the last few days and what it means to myself and the team and all of us here at Wakelet and all of our community from around the world. It makes such a difference in our day-to-day when we have Wakelet Community Week to plan for, and all the planning that's gone into it, and everybody who's joined from around the world doing their sessions and sharing their expertise. Before we wrap the week up, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. I know we say thank you a lot, but I wanted to say it again to all of you, not just for being here this week, but for everything that you've brought to the community, your energy, your ideas, your honesty, your kindness, the things that you share with one another, the things that you share with us. You know, Community Week isn't just a bunch of sessions that have been put together on a schedule and a calendar. It's something much more than that, right? It's something that we've all built together. It's you sharing your stories, helping each other, making each other feel like you belong, that idea of community, that feeling of togetherness. And honestly, that's what makes Wakelet what it is. It's not just a platform. So I personally have been blown away by all the passion you've shown, all your contributions, all the people that did sessions, not just for the platform, but for each other as well. And the week is ending, but of course, you know, this isn't the end. All of this learning continues throughout the year. It's just another step in the journey that we take together. So keep going, keep creating, keep sharing, and know that you're part of something so much bigger than just a platform. So much bigger than just a profession, so much bigger than just being a community member. You're part of something huge. So from me and from the entire Wakelet team, thank you all so, so much. I am so proud of you all. I am so proud of ourselves. I'm so proud of this community. And I cannot wait for all of us to make an even bigger impact this time next year. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.